Hello, everyone. It's Jennie and Laurie again of Astropath. Just for a quick introduction, Jennie is with hiddenpathastrology.com. That's where you can find her. I am with astrolore.org, and that's where you can find me. We're going to be talking today about Aries season and the Aries new moon. There's a lot of really important things going on this month. This is a really important video to pay attention to. I also want to say, if you have a struggle getting a copy of your chart or understanding what the symbols mean, contact one of us. We can help you through with that. And there'll be both of our email addresses in the comments underneath here. So be in touch if you need anything along those lines or if you have any questions. There's also one of the big things that's happening this month, this season, is Pluto's movement into Aquarius. And we made a video about that. Make sure you watch that. There'll be a link to that video as well below, as well as the very recent Saturn's movement into Pisces as well. So pay attention to those things. And for now, we're going to talk about Aries season. Did I miss anything there, Jennie?
No, I think you hit all the salient points.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So what's important about Aries?
Oh, geez. I mean, Aries is the first sign of the zodiac, so it's a cardinal fire sign, and it's just blast off. Let's go, ignition, move along. I mean, it's a very hot, fast, immediate type of energy. And coming out of Pisces season, Aries energy is quite refreshing in a lot of ways because Pisces is so sort of languishing in the water spaces. And now all of a sudden we're like in this hot, fast, let's go. I like to think of Aries as like the match strike or the kindling starting when you first start a fire and it leaps up, it's got that very hot, fast type of feel to it. So it's pretty easy to visualize. I guess the other thing is that it's the spring equinox. So we're also at one of those cardinal points of the whole season. So Aries really, really shows up in public, partly in the way that it's connected to that spring equinox idea, which is a major holiday in terms of the cross quarter days. So yeah, what do you have to add to the Aries depiction?
Well, I think it's just so interesting this month or this season, Aries season. We start out with, the sun moves into Aries, and then the new moon is right there at 0 degrees Aries. And that 0 degrees, like you're saying, it's a very, very potent degree. There are certain degrees in astrology that are considered critical degrees. 0 degrees, 29 degrees, and 15 degrees are considered critical degrees, which just really means that they're more potent. They're very, very potent. And particularly that 0 degrees, it's called the cardinal point. Anything that happens on a cardinal point, which would be 0 degrees Aries, 0 degrees Cancer, 0 degrees Libra, or 0 degrees Capricorn, those points, anything that happens there is going to be very public. So it's just really interesting that during this season, we have a new moon at 0 degrees Aries. And then at the end of the season, we've got another new moon at 29 degrees Aries. People talk about the blue moon when there's 2 new moons in a month, but a month is a human construct. It's not part of the actual planetary cycles. So that to me doesn't mean much. But I think of this as kind of like a blue moon. There's 2 new moons in the same sign, and that does not happen very often. So it's pretty significant. And yeah, there's just so much movement right now. It's like, like you said, we've been kind of languishing in this area for a lot of different reasons. And now everything's moving forward. Saturn just moved into a new sign. Pluto's getting ready to. Mars is going to finally get out of Gemini. We are just at this moment, while you and I are making this video, our foot is just poised right above the gas pedal, and we're about ready to step on it and blast forward. So get ready.
Yes, it has that blast off energy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting this season. I mean, overall, I was thinking it's kind of like this gallop, like, okay, it's Aries, like, let's go. And there's a really quick movement through the whole season. There's not a whole lot of energy hanging us up. In fact, we're going to break free of some of the energies that have been holding us back. And yet we, as you mentioned, we're going to reach that second new moon at the end of the season. And it's also going to be an eclipse, and Mercury will retrograde the next day. So I kind of see this season as like a gallop and let's go. And then there's kind of this gate at the end that we need to be prepared for, like this gate of, it's not an insurmountable gate, but it's just one that you should know, hey, there's this gate and there's going to be some problem solving and some kind of working out about how I'm going to work with that gate at the end. So it's just good to know that, because I think during the season, there's just a lot of really great energy. There isn't too many crazy things. You have that first week where we have some major tone shifts because, as you said, Pluto goes into Aquarius. And then Mars is going to go into Cancer, which we'll talk a little bit more about. The second week is the most active week where you have some of the couple other little challenges, and then there's a nice trine. The third week of the season, it kind of has the most opportunity. There's some nice sextiles that week. And then the very last week is going to be that let's prepare for that pivot point, and that gate that we're looking at. So that's just a super fast breakdown. Tone shift, active, opportunity, prepare for the pivot.
I love how you're looking at like the eclipse, the end of this season as a gate. And we want to be prepared for that, like you say, but not let it stop us along the way. We've got this whole period of time to just move forward. And if we hit a little bump at the end, or we've got to renegotiate things at the end, that's fine. We are already in motion. And you don't want to slow anything down at this period of time. If there's something that needs to be done, you want to do it. And it'll be great when we get into the individual impacts to see exactly where each person's motion is really being called for.
Yeah, that's great. I agreed. Like, this is knowledge is power. So as we know what the kind of energy looks like, then we know how to use it. Let's open up that Ingress chart real quick, or sorry, the new moon chart really quick. Does that work? Okay.
Yeah.
So this is just to give everybody an illustration of, look at all that Aries energy we have.
Wow.
I have included Chiron in there because it's been hanging around in Aries for a while. But that just gives you, yep, this is the all systems go. And you can really see that with the moon and the sun right at 0 degrees there. That is just super potent. I mean, this is the time to get going, get moving.
Yeah. And I think some of the things that that need to be looked at is this: at the new moon, when the sun moves in there, and then the next day when it joins with the moon, we've got Mars is still in Gemini. It's past its shadow from its recent retrograde. But I think really thinking about Mars during this period of time is going to be really important because of a few things. Mars has been in this long-term square with Neptune, which has really slowed us down. Right? What do you think about that, Mars squaring Neptune? I know you have a particular relationship with Mars square Neptune.
Yeah, I do, because I have one in my chart, so I'm quite familiar. And this, I do feel like I felt the energy of this pretty strongly. I mean, I think let's just talk about the negative side first. This can be very waterlogged, very slow, like Mars being like, let's go, and it can't. Think about trying to run underwater, trying to run across a pool. You just can't. It's just slow, and you kind of get buffeted around by the water. So I think in terms of thinking that you're just going to move forwards and everything's going to fall into place under this square, no, it's not. That's not how it works. Neptune's got its own current, and it requires surrender. So that's been the challenge. Like, think about all that energy that wants to move forwards, and it's like, nope, just kidding. You need to surrender. So I think on the more positive note, it is about how do you surrender, and how do you let compassion infuse your actions. That's really the kind of question. That's how I look at it. Like, you think you're all independent and you're going to do your own thing, but everything you do has an impact. And with this square, it's almost like ripples in the water, you know, like you throw a stone in and it ripples. And it's a recognition of that understanding. That's what I
Right.
think.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because Mars is within what's the date when Mars goes on the 25th?
Yeah.
Just a few days later, Mars gets out of Gemini and it starts really pulling away from that Neptune. And I think part of the surrender that's required with all this Aries and Mars ruling Aries, so that makes it even more important. I think the surrender is to surrendering to taking the actions, even if you're unsure of them.
Yeah. I like that. I like what you said before we met. It was like, you may not be crystal clear about what that action is you need to take, and don't worry about it. Take the action that there's certain actions you know you need to take, and just take them.
Right.
But also take your actions with, it's almost like an act of faith, like a surrender. Like, I'm not exactly sure. I don't know if this is the right direction, but this is what I need to do. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I think that's the surrender because Mars is getting out of there. Mars is moving forward. It's like, okay, we've been in this place, kind of grappling with these passive ideas, struggling in the water, so to speak. But now it's time to just move forward anyway. And I think, one of the things about Aries is it's such a solitary sign in a lot of ways. It's like the action has to be taken on your own. And yet, I also think that at this moment, it's really interesting that Venus and the North Node are right there together. And
Hmm.
and in Taurus. And I think there's a certain something to be said there of look around at who's supporting you and understand that you're not alone. Your
Yeah.
actions may be required to be very independent and on your own, but don't forget that there are others there to support you. And it's in Taurus. Venus is so happy in Taurus. It wants to, I just have this image of you going out and taking these actions, even though you're a little unsure. Still, you really don't know if you're taking the right actions, but you're going to push forward and you're going to have the courage that Aries is determined to teach us, and you're going to move forward. And then you're going to go home and somebody's going to give you a nice massage.
Oh, good. I like this. Thanks, Laurie.
Well, I think
Yeah.
that's what I see with
Mhm.
that Venus and Taurus right there with the North Node. It's like accept the support, the beauty, and the love that is available
Mhm.
after a long day of being courageous and pushing yourself forward.
Mhm. Yeah, I really like that you brought this into the conversation, because I do think that, especially if you're living in the United States and other Western cultures, there's a huge push on the individualistic way of being. And the truth is that we are actually in relationship with everything around us and everyone around us. And that's a major paradigm shift that is happening in culture right now. And this is part of that message, is just kind of like, hey, like, you're bringing in resources, you're talking to people about what's going on, you're getting support, you're supporting others. And really, this self-oriented action of Aries, it's not happening in a vacuum. I mean, these are happening in terms of like, take action on, this relationship that's going to help you with your business, and that you're going to help that other person. Or, I really, really like that you brought that in. I think it's helpful. And Taurus is so stable and grounded, after Aries, so I really like that that is part of this picture. And also that this is the last gasp of that Neptune Mars square. It's been going on, oh gosh, since at least September. We've been feeling the effects of that. So this is it's nice to kind of point it out and say surrender, and then we're going to be able to walk away from the challenge of that aspect that's been going
Right.
on for so long.
Yeah,
So
I think it's going to be a huge relief. And another thing I want to say about Aries. Oh, I wore red for Aries,
lovely.
because Aries is red. But to really understand, people think about Aries, all this strength and determination, and I'm going to move forward and I'm going to move mountains and the pioneer and all those things. But really, what is it that drives Aries? There's a vulnerability in Aries that I think people don't quite realize. And that's one of the reasons that I get really happy when I see that Venus conjunct the North Node is there's a vulnerability in having to take those actions, even if you're scared of them, even if there's an uncertainty, you still have to just get yourself out of bed and push yourself forward. But then you do have that ability to rest in that Taurus place at the end of the day, or in the middle of the day, go for a walk with a friend.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I think to know about this chart is that, with Pluto just about to move into Aquarius, which it does 2 days after this chart, there's a very strong sextile from that Pluto to the sun and moon. So that really brings in the empowerment of Pluto. To me, it always elevates that, hey, your actions aren't in a vacuum. Your actions actually have a big impact, both in your personal life, but in that ripple effect, in the weaving of the fabric of society. We each have a thread, and your thread matters. And I think that there's a tremendous opportunity to kind of really understand that in a really powerful way, which I like.
Yeah. Pluto in a sextile aspect, that is really lovely.
Very helpful.
Yeah, that's quite helpful for sure. Okay, what else?
Well, let me get out of this chart here. I think we're done looking at this, right?
Yes, I think
Let's get out
so.
of that.
Did we need to look at this at all?
Yeah, because let's talk a little bit about, we've already mentioned that if you want to know more about Pluto in Aquarius, please watch our video. That really breaks it down. I think that's a pretty long video, so do that. But I think we need to talk a little bit about Mars entering Cancer, don't you think?
Yes, absolutely. So Mars enters Cancer on the 25th at 7:45 a.m. Eastern time, just for wherever you live. So one of the reasons that Mars entering Cancer is so significant right now is because Mars has been in Gemini for so long. Mars usually spends, I don't know, 6 weeks or something going through a sign, not very long. It just kind of zips along. But because of the retrograde that we had last fall, Mars has actually been in Gemini since last August. That's a long time.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's a long time. So we've been really grappling in this area of Gemini with Mars for so long. And with Mars ruling Aries, so it rules this whole season, its movement finally is, I think of it as a freedom. It's finally getting out of Gemini.
Yeah, I mean, well, there is a video, by the way, of Mars in Gemini, which you can also revisit. Because Mars in Gemini is a fairly unstable energy. I mean, Gemini is so quick and fast moving and zipping around, it has a real problem with getting grounded. And having Mars in that Gemini, there's a real possibility of there being anxiety and agitation and maybe some frustration around communication and your thought process. I think the big lesson has been about communication. That's how I tend to look at it, that we're all learning how to communicate in a different way. And I think that that's maybe been the big question. And so now I do feel this sense of relief. Even though in traditional astrology, Mars is not supposed to be super happy in Cancer, I don't necessarily buy into all that. I think it has a point. But I see this as a relief. It's going into a stable, into a cardinal sign, which I think jives pretty nicely with that Mars, that Cancer is a proactive sign. Even though it's a water sign, it's proactive and it wants to initiate actions. So I think that Mars does work with Cancer in that sense. What else do you think about Mars and Cancer, Laurie?
Well, I one of the things that we talked about in the video that we made about Mars and Gemini, we talked about, wherever that is in your chart being an area where you're rewriting the story that you've been telling yourself in that area for a long time. So, you've done that work. And this is just, to me, it is. And I really like that you said that, the fact that that Cancer is another cardinal sign really does support Mars in that area. yes, there is a lot of negativity attached to Mars being in Cancer, but I agree with you. I don't necessarily, I think we can learn to work with these things. It's not like, oh, Mars in Cancer is a bad thing. No, it's not. It's not, it's not Mars's very favorite place to be, but it is a cardinal sign. So it does have the ability to take action and move forward in that area. And yeah, on the other end of being stuck in one place for so long, reworking that area, now we've got a whole new area of our lives to move into, so this is going to put our energetic nature into a more sensitive area of our lives. Certainly, we're going to be bringing our energy more to caring for others.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, our energy may turn more toward home and family in some ways, taking action there rather than in our own overly active mind.
Yeah. Yeah, this is an opportunity to take care of something, wherever it falls in your chart, which we'll get into the individual impacts. It is an opportunity to take care of something. I always think about Cancer as being a sign of like concern, like, hey, how are you doing? What do you need? So it's kind of bringing that inquisition into yourself or whatever area of life. Like, what does this part of life need right now? And then taking action on it. That's kind of what it brings. And if you think of it that way, and you also trust that you've done some of that more watery empathy type of work, because we've just come out of Pisces season, you've done that. So now you can bring that energy forwards. And also if you've done the work of rewriting your story, wherever Mars is falling, now it's time to kind of trust the work that you've done so that you can take the action needed to take care of things in the way that it needs to be taken care of.
Yeah. I think that's perfect.
Okay.
Lovely. And then just to kind of finish up this list, we've got Mercury entering Taurus on April 3rd. And then after the end of Aries season, it goes retrograde, still in Taurus, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
I think is the entire retrograde is in Taurus. Is that right? I'm not sure.
I think so, but I don't have it at my fingertips, but I'm pretty sure.
We'll do a video later.
Yeah, I do want to do a Mercury retrograde video. So
yeah.
Yeah, and that's a good Mercury entering Taurus, time to slow down, get some grounding underneath your feet, like take a pause mentally while you're still doing all your active Aries stuff. And then we come to that Libra full moon on April 6th. And that brings in that nice counterpoint. That's another reminder about being in relationship. Aries and Libra in their polarity together is always referring to the self and the other and how you maintain your autonomy yet cooperate. So I think there's a lot of collaboration potential with that full moon. And it's a really nice counterpoint right in the middle of the season.
Right. So, yeah, that's a good point. In the middle of this blasting forward there at the full moon, we really have to consider again who we're in relationship with that full moon. That's great. And we'll do a video about that as well. And then on the 11th, Venus enters Gemini.
And then trines Pluto that same day. So yeah. So this is a great time for deep conversation, right? I mean, this is finding yourself more able to find the words that you need to have the conversation that is required of you, and it's going to go deep. It's got a far reach with that.
We'll have to make a video that day, Jennie.
We're going to be making videos every single day.
Seriously, though, Venus entering Gemini and trining Pluto, that's a very powerful ability to connect verbally, powerfully. That's lovely. And then we come to that eclipse, 29 degrees Aries. So that's the whole season in a little tiny nutshell. And whoops, I just lost everything. Oh, here we go. I'm going to stop sharing that. And is there anything else we want to talk about before we hop into the individual impacts?
The only thing I could say is just that there are some nice there's a nice trine and some sextiles, but I think the highlight you brought up was that Sun conjuncting Jupiter on April 11th. That is a really lovely beginning of a new cycle of independence and expansion of the action that you want to take. That's initiating a year-long cycle. So is that the aspect you wanted to bring in?
Yes, I love that aspect. That aspect happens once a year. Sun conjunct Jupiter. It happens on April 11th at 6:06 p.m. Eastern time. So, any conjunction begins a process, begins a cycle. You can think of this as, a time similar to a new moon of planting a seed for the expansion, expansion and growth in whatever area Aries is. So this is, this whole month is so much about starting processes that I think this is really, really picks up on the new moon. It's like there's a new moon in Aries, and then a few weeks later, the Sun and Jupiter conjunct in Aries. We're planting seeds for growth in the future. I love that. So if you are going to do some sort of a ritual with that particular conjunction, do it the following day.
Yeah.
You always want to give it a little bit of space.
I think, that's a good point. Like just overall, like this Aries season, it's always you're thinking about planting seeds and brand new. And it really is that way, more so because you have those planetary shifts into new signs, and then you have that really lovely conjunction. I think that there is a lot of just messaging around starting these new cycles and just preparing for it in that way. Yeah. So,
all right.
Okay. Anything else about the season you wanted to bring up, or
I don't think so. I mean,
okay.
I think we've covered what we need to, and I think we're ready to move on to the personal pieces. Okay, so now we are going to start with those of you with Aries rising. This puts the focus of Aries season. It doesn't get more personal than this. It is in your first house. This is all about you taking action on you, for you, like that, right?
Yeah, this is a very, as you said, this is very personal. This is you thinking about your life direction, your self-image. The key word here is self-awareness. And guess what? With the sun and moon in there, you're not going to be able to get away from self-awareness. So this is what you're working with.
Yeah. So, one of the things to think about, and the reason we've got on this image, we've got the sun and moon for the new moon. That's where you're planting a seed for taking action on self-image, on self-direction, all of those things. But the reason that we have Mars here is because Mars is just finishing up its travels through your third house, where since last August, you've been really working on changing the narrative you have about how you communicate. And now Mars is about to move into your fourth house. That you've done that work, you've changed that narrative, and now you bring what you've learned into Mars coming into the fourth house in Cancer, where you now have to use that direct energy to care for someone in your family or someone very close.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is with this is that what Mars is doing is it's putting a demand on Aries, so to speak, because it's squaring the Aries planets. So what's happening is that there's a little bit of a demand. While you might feel like, hey, I just want to do all the self-development work right now. Like, I need to focus on me. But someone in your family needs your attention. So the question here is, how do you do both? You don't want to do one and expense at the other, right? You want to make sure you're doing both. And that's the tricky part, because it might feel quite a bit of a demand being put on you. But that's the thing to do. Over here, taking action on your self-development. Over there, making sure that whoever that person is in your family or people, that you're able to take care of them and you're able to offer that more Cancer loving energy that person needs.
Absolutely. And just to say it might not actually be a family member at all. It might be you have a flood in your basement.
Yep.
You know, really, it
Mhm.
might be something around your home that is demanding your attention in a different way that feels like it feels like there's a choice, but you've got to do both. And that's
Yeah.
really, you know, your development, your growth, your action is on self while taking care of business around the home and family.
Yeah, and also just because you're right, Laura, you got to add those things in. And it's like also other things about the fourth house. It could be something about the roots of your personality. I mean, that's another way to look at the fourth house. So you're doing self development, but you're also going, oh gosh, I've got to get more anchor here. I'm not quite as stable as I need to be. So it could be more of a psychological focus. It also could be more of an ancient focus, ancestry, lineage, things like that that are coming. So it's something in that realm, all symbolized by the one keyword of home. It could be also could be a parent that needs your attention. So
Yeah, I
thanks
like
for
that
bringing
you
that up.
brought up
Mhm.
ancestor. I just have, you know, these different ideas that come to mind. You know, maybe you've discovered a whole new ancestral line that you didn't know you had, and that's pulling your attention away from singularity of self. At any rate, yeah, there's something in that realm of home and family and ancestor and deep inner core that is pulling on your attention. And yeah, both need to be taken care of. Bottom line, take your actions, get started, think about yourself, how you're developing yourself, how other people see you. And this is a very, very strong position. So I think
Mhm.
we all set with that one.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay, now we're going to move on to those of you with Taurus rising.
Mhm.
What do you think of this one, Jenny? I'm going to
Well,
toss it
let's
to
see.
you.
Yeah, I mean, Taurus rising is interesting because it places that sun and moon in your 12th house. The 12th house is always the thing that's hidden from view. It isn't really easy to explain the 12th house because there's so many different pieces to it. But essentially, it's referring to these deep unconscious patterns that you kind of bury. And with Aries in the 12th house, it definitely suggests a struggle with having a true deep understanding of who you really are, of trying to find that selfhood, of trying to activate that fiery energy that's really behind the scenes. So it's not the easiest placement for Aries. I mean, it can really come out as frustration, or I don't know, just feeling stuck in those same old patterns that you can't quite seem to see. But fortunately, with Aries season, this is a really good opportunity to just kind of let some of those things come into the light, let them show up. It's going to shine a light in a way that you can't always see. So it's a good time to see that, and something that you can actually take action on instead of being so confused about what it might be. It's like something coming to light and taking action on it.
Yeah, and remembering too that what was it on the 25th? I think on the 25th when the Sun and Jupiter conjunct there in Aries as well. So you've got several opportunities to really throughout this month to really plant a seed here for the growth and development of looking at those hidden patterns
Mhm.
in your own subconscious and really working with them. That's the demand. You know, wherever Aries is, we have to develop courage. We have to take action and develop courage. And even if it's in a dark, hidden area like the 12th house, we've got to take those actions. And that action could be anything from, I don't know, setting up an appointment with a therapist, to talking to a really trusted friend, to buying a self-help book, or watching on Netflix a documentary called Stutz. I recommend it highly.
Yeah.
So you know, that's the area where your foot is on the gas pedal. You've got to take some actions to learn to understand these deep inner patterns.
Mhm.
And Mars, why do we have Mars showing up here? Well, because Mars is just moving into that third house. And that suggests that for the past, since last August, you've been really working on developing a new narrative about your own self-worth.
Mhm.
And yeah, that's kind of been a tricky job. I'm sure it's probably shown up in some areas around money, resources, but it's really been about learning to better understand um, your own self-worth. And now with Mars moving into the third house, you've got to bring that new understanding into your conversations in some way. Maybe there's some, and then we've got the square. Once Mars is in there, it's squaring those planets. What is it about those unconscious patterns that you're getting started to understand that you need to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, this might feel at odds. I mean, Mars is squaring the Aries planet, so it's putting a demand, it's putting a load on that. It's making some stress happen, essentially. And what that stress is about is that you can't just do that work in a vacuum hidden behind the scenes. You have to bring it out in some way, that you're sharing it, you're talking about it. And it's an important process. It's a really important thing. And the tendency here might be just to try to shy away from both. But the reality is you need to do both. You need to take independent action on the unconscious patterns, and you need to find a way to have conversation about it and bring it into a more vulnerable place. And that's how you're actually going to take care of yourself, taking action, taking care of yourself. At the same time, that third house refers to siblings. It can refer to close friends. It refers to how you navigate your immediate environment. So there's also something about those topics. It's bringing those topics to light too.
Yeah, I think of that like you're needing to take action on understanding your unconscious patterns. And at the same time, you need to be caring for your ability to speak and how others are receiving your conversation. I think about the sibling issue here a lot. You're rummaging around in your unconscious, and your siblings are attached to that because they grew up side by side with you, and there's a connection there. So there's something in here that your conversations are really caring for others through understanding your own unconscious.
Yeah. I like that you're mentioning this as a link, because I think with anyone with this, that's a powerful link. And these are both what you call cadent houses, so the 12th and the 3rd. So to me, that just makes a big statement about this is something you need to learn. This is a learning process for Taurus rising, for sure. And so it's, tapping into perhaps the whole time Mars was in Gemini, you learned a little more about your curiosity. So I would say tap the curiosity you learned as you investigated those issues, because that's going to help you cope with this area. I mean, this part of your life right now.
Absolutely. As you're talking, I'm thinking about Taurus rising and how Taurus just wants everything to be steady and beautiful. It doesn't want this upset of Aries and Mars. It just wants things to be calm and really being vulnerable to this kind of developing the courage to face the unconscious patterns, being vulnerable to speak about those unconscious patterns is not necessarily easy for Taurus, because Taurus would really rather just take a nap.
Absolutely. No, it's absolutely not really wanting to deal with this. It's a little bit like an irritant. And like, oh, if I just close my eyes, and it reminds me of the Ferdinand the Bull story. If I just close my eyes and sleep underneath the tree, it's all just going to go away, and and unfortunately, I'm sorry, Taurus rising, but it's not, because if you don't face these things, they end up just controlling your behavior. So if you're not dealing with these things, what's probably happening? Probably saying some angry words, probably like projecting some of those frustrated feelings. If you find yourself doing that, it is a really good sign of I'm not wanting to learn. So hopefully, if you're watching this Taurus rising, you're willing to learn just because you're watching this video.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to mention here, April 11th, that Jupiter and Sun conjunction in that 12th house, that's such a beautiful statement. Just, there is an opportunity. It feels like feels like we're being very pessimistic here, but this is a really beautiful opportunity to expand your understanding of yourself and expand your ability to bring your vulnerability. Yes, it's not your favorite thing to do, and it's going to really bring such high benefits.
Yeah, it's totally worthwhile.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
You can still take naps.
Yeah, and hopefully it feels validating. It's not meant to be scoldy. It's meant to validate, gosh, it has been tough. Okay, what do I
Right.
need to do? Here you
Right.
are.
Right, exactly. Okay, so I think we're all set with that. Let's move on to those of you with Gemini rising.
Hmm.
If you
Yeah,
have Gemini rising, I'll start this one, okay, Jenny?
yeah, do it. Do it up.
We'll take turns a little bit. If you've got Gemini rising, the Aries season and the Aries new moon is really shining a light in the area of the 11th house, the area of your community, the people in your life that support you to what you really desire. It's really where we receive love from others. So that's where you want to take action there. You're ready to take action, to move forward, to start that new group, whatever it is, or to break into a position of leadership in some group you're already involved in. There's something, your foot is on the accelerator. You're ready to take action in that area. There's also, it's Aries, so there's a certain amount of vulnerability there, but do what you need to do. You're developing the courage to take those actions and to plant those seeds. Now, Mars, how does Mars play into that?
Well, Mars, the red planet. Well, Mars is about to move into Cancer. So it's a little bit at odds. It's squaring the planets in Aries. So it's kind of placing this demand on you that while you're up there doing up there in front of the group, doing your leadership stuff, facing courage there or finding courage there, there's also this demand that you be looking at how you value yourself. I mean, that's the psychological meaning. Mars moving into your second house is kind of requiring that you look into how do you feel about yourself? How do you love yourself? How do you care for yourself? Because there's a need for some nurturing in that area. And it's at odds with that fun out there energy of the 11th house. So it's kind of like, well, you got to do both. While you're having fun, you also need to make sure that you're taking care of you and that you're feeling confident and working with those energies.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, since last August, when Mars first moved into Gemini, you've been really, working on self, trying to understand yourself. And now as it moves into the second house, it really brings the gift of self-understanding into, okay, so now I understand myself a lot better than I did. How am I going to take action on bringing that into a place of real self-worth? And I hate, this might sound a little silly, but you might need to spend some money on yourself. Just really simply spend money on self-care. Go spend money, get a massage, as you're being courageous and getting into leadership position or whatever it is around that 11th house, you need some real self-care in order to do that.
Yes, both of these houses, the 11th and the second, they work with resources. So it's like using your resources. Like, what are your resources? And then doing that. It's an expression of self-care. The 11th house is more like the social resources. So it's, how do those two things work together? How do your personal resources work with the social resources? How do you let your community sort of prop you up and offer you support? Yet at the same time, you're being asked to do that for yourself through the second house. So there's kind of a push and pull here. I mean, your task, Gemini rising, is to figure out how to bring these two things together and have those things kind of line up. And there might be some challenge around doing that. So,
yeah. All right, get your
right.
foot on that gas pedal and move forward. Okay, now we're going to move on to, whoops, hang on here. Going to move on to those of you with Cancer rising.
Mhm.
Oh, let's talk about Cancer rising. I know a few people with Cancer rising. So those of you with Cancer rising, the focus of Aries season and the Aries new moon is in the 10th house. You've got to find the courage to really step hard and fast on that gas pedal in your career.
Mhm. Yeah,
Simple as that. Just do it. Right?
it's as simple as that. But what's the challenge?
Well, the
Challenge
challenge, there's always a challenge, isn't there?
Yeah.
It's so interesting because Mars rules Aries and Mars is making this movement from one sign to another right now. We're really bringing in Mars here. And what's happening is that since August, Mars has been moving through your 12th house, and you've been really trying to understand a real inner, your own ideas, what you tell yourself about your inner unconscious patterns. So you've learned a lot. You've learned a lot about yourself in this very deep manner over this period of time. And now Mars is going to move into the first house, bringing that energy into your personality, what you've learned, how you've changed your narrative on your own unconscious patterns. Now it's like, oh, now I understand myself better. And now what do I need to do with my energy now? Well, you need to care for yourself on a real fundamental level. You need to feed yourself well. You need to, take hot baths or get a massage or whatever. You need to really be lovingly kind to yourself at the same time as you are courageously stepping on that gas pedal in your career, which isn't always easy. I mean, I think about Cancer rising being Aries direct, and it's not a real natural place, is it?
No, no, this is a crucial time though for Cancer rising, because with Cancer rising, it means that this is happening in your angular houses. The first and the 10th house are hands down the two most powerful houses in the chart. And so having this, happening at the same time, it's a very clear statement around, first of all, this is a time for action. We've already said that because it's Aries, but when you throw in the cardinal, the angular house bit, it really adds more to the picture, and also it is cardinal signs, so it really adds this idea that these are the houses where the action happens. This is where you interface in the most public way in the 10th house and in the most personal way in the first house. And so the tension here is around, with Cancer rising, there's perhaps a desire for privacy, a desire for things to happen kind of behind the scenes. And with Mars there, you are having to self-promote. You are having to find a way to put that sensitive, shy part of yourself like on display. And you're doing it in the name of your career. And it's not very comfortable. And I will speak very personally about that. It is not comfortable. This is exactly where I am at with my business, with astrology. And it's not very comfortable. It's how do these things work together? How can I take action and be that decisive, independent self in my career, and then at the same time be that Cancer person who just wants to nurture and help people, and but have to put that forward as the face of the business, so it's an interesting place. Yeah. But yeah, it's not super comfortable.
It's beautiful how you explained it. Yeah, I guess that makes sense since you're living it. But it is really interesting, that cardinal sign right there on the angles is so strong. And taking those actions, it's going to require the courage of Aries, the determination of Aries, planting those seeds. Keep in mind, on April 11th, when the Sun and Jupiter come together right there in Aries, in your 10th house, that really makes something of that. Make something of, using that period of time as an anchor point, along with the new moon. You think about it. You've got a new moon in that house on March 21st. You've got a Sun conjunct Jupiter there on April 11th, and another new moon eclipse there on April 20th. There's a lot of startup energy in that 10th house.
This is an
So
important time. And also, I think for Cancer rising too, because you've done that behind the scenes work while Mars was in Gemini all that time, this is a very important time for you to trust the process. Like, you've got to surrender to, like, that conversation we had in the beginning of surrendering to, maybe you don't know exactly the right action. It doesn't matter. There's something about just take the action, take some action, because that's part of it, the surrender piece, and you've done the work. So just
I
trust
think
it.
that's so important. Yes, you've done the work, trust the action. Yeah, Neptune's play at this period of time makes it hard to be really clear, to see it really clear. But the really clear message is take action.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Now we are going to move on to those of you who have Leo rising.
Okay.
This puts the focus of the Aries season in your 9th house. 9th house is your worldview. I think of it mostly as worldview. What actions are required?
Well, I think, the 9th house is worldview, but it's worldview based on experiences.
Right.
This is a place that does refer to self-expression along with some other houses together. So, this is not what you think. This is what you go out and you have these experiences in your life. Let's say you go to college and you learn things there, you travel to foreign countries, you go and you have these experiences that inform your worldview. That's where it comes from. It's not from just sitting by yourself thinking about it. So this suggests a time to really take action on actively expanding that worldview, or taking action on the things you've already learned, but also taking action on, and what else do you need to continue to learn? This is a learning placement. That's what I think of with the 9th house, especially.
Yeah, it's really important to think about. Well, first of all, like we've been talking about, you might not know exactly what action needs to be taken. You probably feel very clearly, as all of us do, I think right now, that our foot is poised above accelerator and action needs to be taken. What does that mean in the 9th house? What's the action that could be required? It's to get some particular experience in your life that will help shift and change and grow your worldview. That could be taking a course or a class, or taking up a new study, or traveling, or any of these experiences that expand our understanding of the world. So what is it? You have to really be courageous in taking that action. You've got Leo rising. You've got a lot of energy to do this. The other piece to think about is we've got Mars here. Why is Mars here? Well, Mars is here because it's been in Gemini for so long. Over the course of since last August, you've been really working on grappling with this idea of developing a new narrative, a new understanding of your community, what community means to you, who supports you in the world. And now, as Mars moves out of there and into the 12th house, you've learned a lot about this area that, you've learned a lot about the story, the intellectual connection to community. Now you've got to take that energy and move it into a deeper understanding of your own unconscious patterns.
Yeah. Yeah, this is interesting. Again, we've already, with the 9th house emphasis, you're thinking about learning and expanding. And the 12th house is another level of learning when you really boil it down. And the level of learning has to do with those unconscious patterns. It has to do with, noticing whatever suffering that you might be having and developing compassion for that suffering. There's also a component that's kind of like selfless service in the 12th house. So it's something around having to take care of that portion of your life, having to be willing to look at those unconscious patterns. With Cancer on that 12th house, there's a taking care of, there's a nurturing of the self that needs to happen, but it's on these deeper levels that are hard to talk about and explain. And I know Laurie, you always like to mention the idea of having some sort of therapist in this time frame. And I would agree with that, because a therapist goes over your patterns with you. You do it together. You're looking at your patterns under a microscope or a magnifying glass. That's what you're doing, but you're doing it together, so that brings in that, even though it can feel very alone, this is a good time to call in those resources to help you cope with looking at those. But it doesn't mean you're all messed up necessarily. I mean, we all have our stuff. It's really just an opportunity to look at that and nurture it and take care of it while you're doing this other learning.
As you're talking, I'm thinking about, how these could play together. And I'm just thinking about, the experience going out into the world, looking for experiences that are going to expand your worldview. And what do you bump into? Well, you bump into a lot of human suffering.
Yeah.
If you think about travel or really seeing what's going on in the world and understanding that 12th house often connects us to the suffering of others. So taking this action, Mars, taking the action to care for the suffering of others that you kind of see out in the world in some manner with your experiences.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the action that you need to take is something that is going to really take some courage to develop a larger worldview.
Yeah, because there's definitely, as you're talking, there's definitely some tension between those two. And it might be too that you don't want, you just want things to be like kind of part of this really positive worldview. And then there's this whole other side, but they really do work together. You can't have the light without the dark, and you can't have the dark without the light. So it's kind of like, they work together. So I'm glad you brought that up.
That's beautiful. Put your foot on the gas, have the courage, sign up for I don't know, you sign up to study astrology with one of us, or go on a trip somewhere, something that's going to really open your mind.
Yeah.
There you have it. Okay, now we are going to move on to those of you with Virgo rising. I'm going to let you talk about this one, Jennie.
No, I don't know anyone with this.
This is too personal for me to talk about.
Well, let's see. So with the Aries season, that's going to put that focus right into your 8th house. So this is the area of life you're going to want to plant a seed to take action. The 8th house is another one of those challenging houses to talk about, because it really deals with the challenging emotions or values of other people. This is where kind of other people kind of come at you with their stuff, and you have to learn how to navigate it. So this is a great placement for somebody who's working with people in their deep-seated issues, because the trick here is, how do you occupy the space, shine a light, take action on it, yet have some boundaries with other people and how they're coming at you with their stuff, because you can't help them unless you have some clarity around where you end and they begin. I mean, you can't have it all mushed together. So this is a really good time to take action on that place of other people's values and shared resources. So I think that's what I think about. That's what you're planting a seed for.
So like developing boundaries.
Yeah. And how can you do that? Well, one way you can do that is ritual. I know we like to talk about that, but ritual can be very, very simple. I mean, if you are working with the public in some challenging way, it's what do you do with those couple minutes before you jump into the fray? What do you do like a few minutes before you're meeting with somebody who's going to be sharing with you their difficult things? That's one way to think about it. But just, something that allows you to help navigate those challenges.
Yeah. Well, I think very much, it's like that whole idea of Aries season, Aries new moon. We've got our foot right there on the gas pedal. What is it? I think anyone with Virgo rising needs to ask themselves, where do they need to set boundaries with other people?
Yeah.
whatever that might mean to you. It might mean something about, I don't know, a will that someone died and you and your siblings are fighting. You know, it could mean anything that has to do with how you're navigating other people's resources, other people's money, other people's big beliefs, sexual identity issues, all of those things are eighth house issues. So where do you need to set your boundaries and say, you know, this is where I stand? Yeah, really, I think that's a lot of it, is getting really clear and being willing to say, this is where I stand, period.
Yeah.
You might not agree with me.
Right. I was just thinking that one of the challenges around this is just that, you know, Aries ruled by Mars. I mean, one of the difficulties here might be like cutting too sharp of a boundary and just cutting off and I'm done, because that's sort of an Aries thing, right? To just be very like, oh, I'm done. And part of it might be having the confidence and the courage to go, hey, you know what? This is a little messy and part of me just wants to jump ship, but I'm not going to. So that might be the other end of how do you set those boundaries, because boundaries are not necessarily, it's not meant to be a sword where you just slice and that's it. Sometimes you need to do that, but sometimes that's not what you're trying to do. You don't want to cut that off. You want to figure out how can you occupy the space in a way that it takes courage, because you are having to face sometimes other people's scary things or people coming at you that you don't want to deal with. You'd rather just fight them off.
That's a really good point. So, you know, one of the ways to know whether it's about getting more or less is what takes courage. Yeah. If your natural position is to cut somebody off at the knees because, you know, whatever, your boundaries, then, you know, it might take more courage to actually work on navigating in that area rather than just jumping ship. So yeah, that's very interesting. And then the Mars piece, which we've got drawn on here, because Mars is about to move into your 11th house. So those of you with Virgo rising, Mars has been doing its retrograde and spending all this crazy time since last August. It's been in your 10th house. You have been really working on understanding and, you know, developing a new story, developing a new narrative of what your career path is, and what you're doing. And, you know, these actions that you need to take right now might not be clear, but you've learned a lot around your career, and not just career, but who you are in the outer world. Now Mars goes into that 11th house, and there's something in your community that needs to be cared for. What am I missing here, Jennie?
Oh, well, I was just thinking, you know, Mars going into your 11th house. I mean, this is you stepping into groups. This is you taking action into the way you show up in front of your community. So you're moving a little bit, you're moving out of that career place. I mean, it could still be in your career. It might be groups in your career. It might be how you kind of step up into leadership, possibly in groups. That might be a thing. But it's some way in your community. It's how you're appearing. And now is the time to take that new narrative that you've created over the last few months of Mars being in your 10th house, and just take bold action, step up right in front of that community and be willing to be seen. This is not an easy place for Virgo rising, because Cancer is a place where you have some vulnerability. So it's like having to show up in that public space in a new way. That is sort of at odds in a way with that 8th house. And the question is, how do you do both? How do you do that boundary work? And then yet, how do you show up, you know, courageously in front of your community? And so it's you needing to do both. You got to do the deeper work. You got to do the more public work at the same time.
And you've got to really look at where, you know, because community, that 11th house is the community that supports you, not really the other way around. So it's like finding that community, even if it's at odds with the actions you're taking. I don't know how I'm saying that. I'm doing a little spin in my head here, But
Well,
there's,
yeah.
it's interesting in that.
Yeah, I mean, both of these, again, both of these houses are dealing with resources. So on one hand, in the eighth house, you're dealing with the shared resources, other people coming at you, how do you navigate that? But then in the 11th house, you're looking at community resources, of which you're only one small part. And so the question to ask is, how are you receiving the support of your community? And that's giving you sort of this social resource. It's kind of, I mean, I think to me, it's sort of like this hidden place and this public place that you're trying to work with.
Yeah.
How do you accept support? How do you understand how to draw boundaries in how you support others? I mean, there's kind of this funny little interplay between the two. So
it's interesting. I like thinking about that. Okay, I think we've said
okay.
enough about it, though. I could talk
All right.
about it for another 20 minutes, but it would start getting way too personal.
Okay.
All
Great.
right. Hang on a second. Okay, Jennie, we are about to talk about those of you out there with Libra rising. This is interesting, isn't it? The people with Libra rising have Aries in their seventh house. So this is where the courage to take action and to start something new, put your foot down on that accelerator and go, is all about relationship.
Ooh. Yeah, and I guess right away I'm thinking to myself, well, it might pertain to your actual relationship, but it actually, no matter what, definitely pertains to how you conduct yourself in relationships.
Right.
So
Right.
it's some action that affects how you do partnership, whether it's one you're in or whether you're single, or it doesn't really matter. The work is the same, you know, and has an impact in that way.
Yeah, and it's, it's easy to think of the seventh house as, a spouse or a romantic partner, but it's really any kind of important, significant one-on-one relationship where you, at least in theory, are on equal footing.
Yeah.
So, you want to really take a look at what your current status is of those kind of important relationships, and what it is that needs to be pushed forward, that takes a certain amount of courage to do so at this point.
Yeah. I mean, it could be some personal growth that you need to do, or it might actually be something that needs to occur in your actual relationships right now. So yeah, either way.
It could be anything, it could be anything around relationships. Maybe it's time you get into one. Maybe it's time you get out of one. Maybe it's time you decide what you want to do regarding some sort of friendship or partnership.
Yeah, I know what I was going to add to it is the idea that the seventh house is public. So this is not that little, hot little romance that you started, or it might have been once, but this is where you show up in the public sphere. And that's one of the things that sometimes it gets neglected to be mentioned about the seventh house, is this is not necessarily those private. I mean, this is very much how you show up, to the public, whatever those partnerships are. And Laurie,
that's such a good point. I'm so glad you brought up that point, because that is really important. Love affairs is down there in the fifth house. This is a public relationship. It's a business partnership, or a relationship that's significant, that is in the public eye. That's a really important point. So the reason that we put Mars on these charts is because we wanted to bring into this idea of getting something going there where Aries is in your chart. We wanted to think about Mars is vacating Gemini after being in there since last August, which is a profound amount of time for Mars to be in one area. My cat, this racket my cat is making at my feet, I hope it's not getting picked up too loudly. Would you talk for a minute while I try to rescue this?
Yeah, so basically with Mars in Gemini, as it has been for many months, this has been your opportunity, Libra rising, to rewrite the narrative of your worldview. So these are the experiences that you go and have that inform your worldview. And hopefully it's an area that's pretty expansive, because that's what you're doing with that. But now Mars is moving into your 10th house of career, it's slightly at odds with all of the Aries stuff because it's squaring those Aries planets. So what this means in real speak is a challenge around both needing to address this idea of taking action in partnerships, but also doing something different in your career, taking an action in your career. And this action regards taking care of something. So this might be a way that in your profession that you need to nurture something, either in yourself or in the type of work that you're doing. So you're kind of, what you want to do is look at these two processes at the same time. They're linked. So the work you do in the partnership area is the work shows up somehow in your career and vice versa. It's not always easy to do both of these at once, but it's very important, especially because these are both angular houses, which is where all the action in life kind of happens, the partnerships and where you work in this case.
Yeah, one of the things that this makes me think about is the idea of business partnerships. Possibly it's a situation where the courageous action you have to take or you're being called to take has something to do with a business partner that needs some extra care. And that could create some difficulty. You're doing this equal partnership, and yet there's some care that is required that is connected to all the work you've been doing around your worldview.
Yeah. I mean, because this might bring up, because that 7th and 10th house are in a square relationship to one another, there's tension here. And we can probably all relate to that. I mean, how much time you spend with your partner sometimes can be at odds with how much time you need to spend at work, or vice versa. Or if you're having problems with your partner, it's really hard to focus on work. So we can probably all relate to experiences of having those things yanking on each other. And this Aries season brings those two clearly into focus. Which really sort of promises a very dynamic action happening for you during this Aries season if you're meeting this challenge head on and working with it. The idea is to work with both and not sort of neglect one for the other, but to address both ends of whatever it is you're working on with your partnerships and your professional life.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Many ways this could play out in all of your personal lives.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I like that. It's a very strong thing to have cardinal signs in the angular houses. You are the kind of person, those of you with Libra rising, who really, you're an action taker. You just move forward in pretty dynamic ways. Anytime there's, cardinal signs on those angular houses. It's a powerful statement. So yeah, the focus is on taking action in your relationships, whatever those relationships are, and being willing to, at the same time, be bringing caregiving type energies to your career.
Nice.
Good.
Wonderful.
Okay. So we're going to move on now to those of you with Scorpio rising, and this puts the focus into the 6th house, which is the area of life that's our day-to-day routines. People kind of don't take the 6th house so seriously, but where the heck would we be if we didn't have routines that structure our lives? And this is when you've got Aries in this area, those routines are, we're not talking about, okay, this is the season that highlights your 6th house, so you should learn to meditate. That's not what's going on for people with Scorpio rising. It's more, what you need to start in terms of routines are very active and very physical.
Yeah.
But your foot is on the gas pedal. Go do some skydiving or something.
I mean, it's funny because with Scorpio rising, I can't help but think anybody with a water sign on the ascendant, there's a sensitivity. There's perhaps, with water there, it just brings in the idea of emotions being front and center, like every time you walk into the room. And so I do think that with that sensitivity, it is very important that you make sure you are doing practices that are satisfying to you, that allow you to release angsty energy, and that your health depends on it, is kind of what I want to say. I'm not trying to scare anybody, but just if it's time, if you need to take action on a routine and you've not really been doing it, like, this is your moment. This is your moment to go ahead and step forward, even if you're not quite sure what it is. Go and play pickleball, even if you're like, what the hell is that? I mean, try something new, and just go for it, is what I want to say here. Don't hold back. Like, just go ahead and do it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, that's very much, on the heels of all this Neptune stuff we've been in the middle of. You don't need to be clear exactly what it is. You just need to do something that's going to really get your blood pumping on a day-to-day basis, taking care of yourself in that way. And it's, we added Mars here to take a look at, to think about, because Mars has been, since last August, Mars has been moving through your 8th house. And, we talked about that as kind of building a new narrative about how you navigate other people's issues, basically. And now Mars is just moving into your 9th house. This is particularly important to you because not only is this season highlighted, because Mars rules Aries, but Mars also rules your ascendant. So Mars is always an important planet for you to pay attention to, where it's moving and what it's doing. So, you want to think about, what have you learned over the past however many months since August? What have you learned around how you navigate other people's boundaries, other people's baggage? How do you manage that? And how that now informs bringing a more tender side of yourself to your understanding of bigger world pictures, 9th house worldview type issues.
Yeah, and I can't help but think too, again, with that Scorpio rising, that you, at your core, you are a wisdom seeker. You are seeking of adventures of the inner and the outer sword. Just because your moon is in charge of that area of life where you gain wisdom, so it's really important that you embrace that, and that you allow yourself to continue to seek out experiences that support your emotional growth, that are in fact the way that you get excited and that you care for yourself. That's what this Mars going into your 9th house is suggesting, is act on those things, like nurture that part of yourself that needs to seek out wisdom, like that needs to have adventures, that needs to meet, interesting new foreign people that you don't know anything about, so I think that it kind of brings a real external allowance, I would say, of like, have those interactions, like seek them out. It'd be a good time to do that.
Yeah, that's really nice. I like how you brought that in there. There is, with Scorpio rising, your heart is really connected to these bigger picture ideas. So with Mars moving in there, what are you going to learn? What are you going to learn about how you love in a bigger way?
Yeah. And I mean, both of these houses, the 6th and the 9th, are concerned with learning. I mean, these are both places, they're called cadent houses in astrology, and they're just places where you are, ready and willing to take on something new, that you're embracing new experiences, trying to learn new things. And so it's a very active placement that's happening here, that's going to overall contribute to your evolution and growth.
So there's a little bit of a rub between these two areas because they are in square aspect to each other, Cancer and Aries. So, you're taking action in that area of your day-to-day routines. You're starting some mountain biking adventures. And where's the rub here?
The rub is that sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I'm sorry, I thought you were asking me. What
I think I was
thinking, the 6th house is very practical and like, let's go and feet on the ground, and we're doing it now, and we're moving our bodies, and it's very sort of tangible, and has an immediate impact. The 9th house is not as easy to contain. It's very expansive, and it's not necessarily about the practical. It's about learning, might be about learning about the occult or something like astrology that has its practical side, but it's more in this sort of broader intuitive realm. And whereas the sixth house is like, nope, I want results right now. And the ninth house is like, oh, I don't care as much about results. I just want to expand. So that's where a little bit of the rub is. They can work beautifully together. And I hope that those of you with Scorpio rising will find a way to really honor both of these two dynamic parts of your life, because that's really the key.
Yeah, that is the key. In any point where there's a square aspect, a 90-degree basically separation between two things, it's like the insistence of a square is to do the work to hold both positions.
I like that word, insistence. That's exactly it.
Yeah. A square is an insistence. You've got to do the work. And it's true. Yeah. The Aries in that sixth house is like, oh, we're going to go out mountain biking. And then Mars is saying, well, wait a minute. I want to learn about how to love. You can see there's a bit of a rub there. There's a bit of a rub there. Okay. I think we're ready to move on.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we're going to move on to those of you with Sagittarius rising. This puts the focus of Aries during this Aries season and new moon in your fifth house, which is the area where we give of ourselves most authentically. I think of that fifth house is the area of creativity. It's the area of fun. It's the old-time astrologers called it the house of children, love affairs, and creativity. We got some pushback with some responses recently that we talked apparently a bit too much about children here. And, children, when I think about children in the fifth house, children are a metaphor for all of our creativity.
Yes, where we play. I mean, I just think the question to ask yourself, Sagittarius rising in this season, is, am I having enough fun? And addressing that and taking action immediately to find what are the ways you want to express yourself. This might be joyful dance. This might be just playing on the playground with younger people. I mean, there's so many different ways this could play out. But the question to ask yourself is, am I having enough fun? And if the answer is no, then you need to figure out how to do it. And if the answer is yes, great, keep doing it.
Right. And that fun has to be attached to expression.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe all fun is attached to expression. I don't know. But yeah, that fifth house is expressing yourself. And with Aries there, Sagittarius rising, that's a very fiery. And then we've got the fire here in the fifth house. This is a really dynamic. This is very, very dynamic for those of you with Sagittarius rising. Yeah, have fun, create something. If you're not like Jennie said, if you're not having fun, find something that's fun, and you want it to be something that's creative.
Yeah. Something kind of cheesy just popped in my head. I was thinking about that movie Flashdance from the 80s, and I was thinking about her all sweaty and doing her dance routine, and I was like, that's fifth house, like pursuit of creativity and pleasure, and I mean it really sums it up. So sorry, it just popped in my head. I had to share.
Well, you're showing your age there, Jen.
No, I know.
Referring to movies in the 80s. Yeah, so have fun, and that fifth house can relate to children. It can relate to love affairs, and it can relate to swinging from the rafters on a, whatever. There's a lot of things that it can relate to, but it's got to be fun and it's got to be expressive. And then let's talk about Mars. The reason we put Mars in here is because Mars rules those planets in Aries. So it's very important. And the fact that it changes sign after being in Gemini for an extraordinary amount of time, Mars has been in your seventh house in Gemini since last August. And this has been a place where you've probably had some bumps along the road since then with that retrograde in there. And, the way we've been talking about it is during the course of this time, you've kind of, changed your narrative about what relationship means to you, who you are in relationship, who you want to be in relationship with, whatever that means. So you've done a lot of work. And now as Mars is ready to exit that house and go into the 8th house, it's like, what have you learned in this area of one-on-one relationship that you're now going to take out of the intellectual realm and move it into a more heart-centered area, because it's going into Cancer, regarding how you navigate other people's issues?
Yeah. It's interesting as you're talking, because I was thinking, boy, you know, having Mars in your 7th house, like there's been some challenges, and then woo, now we're going to the 8th house, like whoa, like so you're basically in the 7th house, you can see the iceberg, and in the 8th house, it's all below the surface, and you're like, ooh. But I think that's a really good thing about, because you've had to do that work in the 7th house. I think that you are prepared to go to the deeper level, because the deeper level, even though it can be challenging and you're dealing a little bit more of you know, some of your unconscious behaviors, the other person's unconscious behaviors, but it also allows you to really deepen the relationship into a new level, and that is really necessary. I mean, that brings it into a much more kind of nourishing place, which I do think of with having Cancer on the 8th house here. That the tricky part is it can feel sensitive and hard, because you know your moon rules that 8th house for you, is in charge of that 8th house. But at the same time, I think that because you've had that work going on, that you're ready for this, and it can bring in a whole new level of satisfaction. You just have to be ready to take action on it, and if you know this is what's happening, it gives you the impetus to go ahead and take some more action, as you get into that.
Yeah, I think Sagittarius is such an interesting sign, and we could talk about it all day. But you know, if you've done your work, in this life, you have the ability to be very sensitive to other people's stuff, so to speak, to be very willing to be vulnerable in the face of other people's stuff as well. And I think this really highlights that ability, and that, you know, now that you've kind of rewritten the narrative about who you are and how you relate to people, now you go into, yeah, that deeper place of, okay, I need to be a little vulnerable in this area, actively vulnerable, not passively vulnerable. It's Mars, actively vulnerable in this area. And because there is a square formed between the signs of Aries and Cancer, there's a little bit of a rub there. It's like all this fast action that you're trying to do around having fun doesn't really fit real well with suddenly needing to be actively vulnerable in the face of other people's stuff. But you've got to do both. So you take those people, you go on a, you know, off-road bike ride, and you have deep conversations when you stop for a drink of water or whatever, you know, bringing those things together in some way where you're having fun and showing vulnerability to people that need you to model that.
Yeah, it's interesting, because you certainly want to think about, how do these two places in your life relate? And another thing I was thinking was just that relationship in reverse, like, because you're able to show up and be vulnerable and be with people in their deep, dark spaces, that the other end of that is, okay, phew, I had that interaction, and now I'm going to go and do my pursuit for me, where I don't have to do the, you know, heavy duty back and forth. And in actual fact, when I go and do the thing for me and I liberate myself, it's just free pouring out of love, you know, that whether I'm dancing in a room by myself or doing something else, it's still an expression of sort of an exuding of love that just comes out of you, because you're doing something that is so joyful. And I think that that's how they work together. It's kind of like the light and the dark. You know, both of these houses have to do with resources, and so it's the creative resources you have, and then the 8th house is where you show up in that vulnerable space and you recognize the shared resources you have with other people, because you can relate to that vulnerability and you're able to be there. So there's a really nice interplay. Not the easiest, but it's kind of like one pushes the other. It's like you have to do the thing because you did the other thing. I mean, there's a push. that might feel intense, but also very dynamic and is very growth oriented.
Yeah.
So
yeah, square aspects, 90-degree aspects are always such an interesting thing to watch because they can feel like a real challenge, but the insistence for growth is that you learn to activate and work with both. It's like the square aspect, they're working against each other in some way. But if you can just manage both together, there's a lot of growth potential there.
yeah, I mean, it's something like if you feel like they're pitting against each other, be assured that there is another way through that includes both. You just might not be able to see it easily, especially with that eighth house involvement. But great, I think.
Okay.
Kind of covers that one. So
then we're going to move on to those of you with Capricorn rising. Where's this showing up, Jennie?
oh my. So with Capricorn rising, Aries season's in your 4th house. So this is everything to do with your foundation and your roots, which might be your family members that you are close with. It might be your actual psychological place in life where you find your own inner security through the work that you've done. That's what's showing up. So some kind of action that you need to take that pertains to this part of life, that pertains to this foundation or family life. Sometimes this is as obvious as like, oh my, I need to get a new floor in my house. And so you're literally taking action to do something that puts ground underneath your feet. Or it could be something more, a person, a relationship, a parent, those other kinds of things, or even some ancestors that come in. And I mean, maybe this is time to find out about your lineage, for once and for all. That be warned if you do that, because you never know what might happen. But that's kind of the short of it with the 4th house. So
yeah. So and again, we want to remember that because of all the Neptune involvement recently, that you might not be clear what the action is. You might really not be clear, but you feel it. You feel that there's something that has to be done. And whatever action you take will ultimately, through the course of these next weeks, will become more clear as we get a little farther away from Neptune's involvement. It's going to become more and more clear exactly what the action is. And it could be you need a new roof on the house. It could be your grandmother needs you to come take care of her. It could be any number of things.
Yeah. And I mean, also we have included Mars in this chart. Let's see how the red planet up there. We've included Mars because Mars rules over Aries. So it's kind of in charge of all those Aries planets. But also because it's just about to move into Cancer. It has been in Gemini for, months, since August, where you've had to rewrite the narrative around your routines and your practices. But having Mars now move into your 7th house, that's a big deal because it's now moving out of the kind of private realm of the first 6 houses and now move above the horizon and come into public view. So I don't know, this is a really cool time to nurture relationships, nurture either a partner that you're with, or nurture the idea that maybe you could be open to a partnership where you couldn't before. This might be an intimate relationship. This also could be a work colleague or some other sort of one-on-one partnership. So it's pretty exciting. This is a big move for Capricorn rising. It's a big change.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, you think about both of those moving into angular houses, both of those cardinal planets moving into angular houses. And there's a bit of a rub because it's a 90-degree aspect. So there's kind of a little bit of a discord between them, but they both have to be honored and worked with. And you could see this. I really love thinking about, it's coming up. Mars is coming up over the horizon. It's suddenly public. And that could be what a little bit of the rub is. Maybe the family didn't know you were dating somebody or had a new business partner. Who knows? But there's some bit of a rub between family and partner or partnership, or in that area. There's something there, and it's your job with this square between them and Mars finally getting out of that 6th house. It's really your job to make sure both are functioning and to manage manage that. I think of a seesaw or teeter-totter, whatever they call them.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine too, this is an easy to imagine tension. I mean, who hasn't had tension between their family of origin and their partner? I mean, it's always a thing. Or even in the case of a business partner, maybe you have a business partner who's quite at odds with your family roots, that your family tradition does not jive with those people, this person who's your partner at work. So, I mean, you can probably relate pretty easily to what that tension might be, and also to the idea that you have to do both. You can't cut off your partner because your family doesn't like them, or if you do, you're cutting off part of yourself too, right? So I mean, there's this idea of having to honor both. So
Yeah. And another way I can imagine it could play out is, you've got a lot of activity going on with your family of origin, and yet your partner, your business partner, or your intimate partner is going through some difficult time where what you need to show up with them is with an open heart of vulnerability. You need to show up in your partnership with that kind of a sense about you, and yet you've got this active stuff going on at home or with the family of origin, so that could create some tension as well inside yourself. It might not show up as tension for anyone else, but for you it's like, oh, I can go snowboarding with my family, or I can go sit and hold my girlfriend's hand. I don't know. Anyway,
all right,
finding a way
get the
to
picture.
keep those balanced. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are going to go on now to those of you with Aquarius rising, and this puts the focus of the Aries season in the third house, which is communication. It also involves kind of the day-to-day patterns of our lives, like going to the grocery store. It involves those people that are involved in those day-to-day patterns of our lives, people that we may see regularly but not know well. It can relate to siblings, to neighbors, that kind of thing. So that's where the focus is. What action needs to be taken? With all of this strong Aries startup energy, your foot is poised over the gas pedal. You need to take some action. It could be as simple as being involved in a conversation you have to have with a sibling.
Yeah. I also think with Aquarius rising, it's like you of all people have the ability to, stand up and say what needs to be said immediately in a sort of a, like that day-to-day setting. Like, if the bus driver's doing something dangerous, that Aquarius rising person is going to be the one to say, hey, what are you doing? It's kind of funny because this is a real bold action associated with how you communicate, which I think is really interesting. And in the meantime, we've got to talk about that Mars, that other red planet you see on there. Mars has been in your 5th house of creativity for months and months and months, like since August. And now it is finally moving out of whatever narrative you had about yourself as a creative person. You've rewritten it. And now you're ready to incorporate that into your day-to-day routines. Like now you're ready to really nurture your routines and habits in a way that really honors that. So that's what Mars signifies going into your 6th house of routines.
Yeah, so there's some action that you'll be taking over the next weeks around the development maybe of new routines, new patterns of self-care that are these aren't the routines of going skydiving. These are the routines of really the softer self-care issues. Go get a massage or start meditating or something that's going to soothe you. That's going to soothe you.
Think about like nourishing and stabilizing routines and how they help you balance the kind of day-to-day emotional ups and downs that us human beings deal with.
Take a bubble bath. You might have to after you yelled at that bus driver, you got in a big fight with that bus driver. and
Yeah.
now go home and take good care of yourself. With all that Aries in that third house, there is some action that needs to be taken around communication, and it may be something that needs to be said. It may also be starting to write that book that you need to write, and perhaps in the course of that, you need some extra self-care.
Yeah. And I mean, I think one of the things we've been talking about in this conversation is the idea that these two areas of life are somewhat at odds with each other. It's interesting because the key is to work with both. The key is to deal with your communication things and also very much take care of the routines and the habits and the work life that you need to do in the sixth house. So, there's a way that these two might be at odds. And, I mean, the third house is very cerebral and intellectual too. And it's very much like in the idea realm, whereas the sixth house is totally about in practice. What are you doing in practice? Are you following through on the ideas you had? So I think that's the interplay, is the follow through, the physical follow through. Like, you might have some ideas about new things you need to start, but you've got to do them in practice in order to have the routines help you and support you. You can't just think about them. I think that's probably what it is, but
Yeah, I think there's something with that Cancer there, really, and Mars going in there, taking action on taking care of yourself. I mean, really, bottom line, that's what it is, right?
Yeah, and also, that sixth house really does have a role to play in your livelihood, your profession. It's the work habits that are part of your livelihood and profession. So it's extra important to take care of that for those reasons. So you can take care of all of you. Your health, your livelihood, and so on.
Okay. Have a great month to all of you. And now we are going to move to those of you with, let me see here, Pisces rising. How's this one show up?
Oh my. Okay, so Pisces rising, we have our Aries focus in that second house. Didn't say that right. Second house. Second house of self-worth, finances, your resources. I mean, those are sort of the three major key words. So it's time to take action on one of these things, and they're often interrelated. I mean, this might well be a time to take action, something to do with your finances and independent action. That is probably the simplest way to think about it. At the same time, it might be that you've done a lot of therapeutic work and you are learning on a whole new level how to value yourself and stand up for yourself and speak up and stand up for yourself. I think that's part of the second house too.
One of the things that I think of is it's Aries season, which is also tax season. Right. I mean, we're coming up on taxes. So this, for those of you with Pisces rising, this may be as simple as get your damn taxes done.
Yeah.
Or hire a new accountant, or, something in that realm of how you manage your finances. And it's so interesting. I really like these conversations that I have sometimes with clients about that interplay between money and our self-worth. And for those of us who have had a totally, a zero balance in our bank accounts at times in our lives, we know what that does to our self-worth. And you get a big raise at work, what happens to yourself, your value of yourself? It just goes up. It's an interesting thing, and it's something to really, I think, for all of us to pay attention to, that connection between money, resources, and self-worth. So there's some action that needs to be taken there. And then we've got Mars over here. We've got this little red planet here. Mars has been on a long, slow slog through your fourth house since last August. You have probably done a lot since then in terms of kind of developing a new narrative around what home and family means to you. One of the reasons we're talking about Mars here is because Mars rules Aries, and there's so much Aries energy that whatever's going on with Mars is important. And right after this new moon, we have Mars finally finally moving out of Gemini and into Cancer. So you want to think, what you've learned about home and family and how you're going to bring that into a compassionate way of a compassionate level of your own creativity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that this is sort of like, how do you take care of yourself through joyful pursuits? Because we all need to have more fun and joy in our lives, or things rapidly disintegrate. I mean, it's got to be some sense of play, and it doesn't have to be complicated. This is just a level of enjoyment, especially when you're against the backdrop of the seriousness of self-worth and money, which can be so intense, and it's like, all right, shake it off and go and do something fun that just feels good, that is a rapturous expression of love, that allows you
Oh my goodness, I love that you just said a rapturous expression of love. I want to put that on a poster somewhere. That's wonderful.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's where you need to direct your sort of more caring energy. Mars is saying, hey, take an action where you are caring for yourself in this way. So make it happen. That's kind of what's going on with that. So I think, there's a tension between these two places in life. That you, as I just said, there's this sort of serious topics of money and so on. And then there's like, hey, let's go have fun. But you can see how it's sort of the light and the dark, that you need to have both. I can see how easy it is to get stuck in one. Either I'm just going to play all the time and forget about that other stuff, or I'm going to be, get into the deep, dark, unhappiness of something to do with money or obsessiveness, so but you got to do both. So that's the question here. How do you honor both ends of the spectrum here?
Yeah. So if you are, if you're struggling with your taxes, just make sure you take good breaks to go out and have fun with people that you love and care about. With that Cancer there, it's really, your way of having fun, your way of expressing yourself is very much from the heart.
Mm-hmm.
That rapturous love. I should have written it down. Oh, the rapturous expression of love. Yeah. I just love that idea. But yeah, it's also, it's a very tender place for you with Pisces rising.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Are we ready to wrap it up?
Yeah, I think so.
I think so too.
Okay.
Okay. So, stop share. Thank you everyone who stayed with us, or those of you with Pisces rising that are still hanging on for the last few seconds.
Yeah.
Thank you. And we will be making another video shortly.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Laurie.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.